Hello, this is Stephen, and this is the Bureau of Lost Culture. When the filmmaker David Lynch died earlier this year, fans created shrines filled with donuts, coffee, cigarettes, blue roses. And that level of spontaneous mourning is usually more common for dead rock stars or royalty than filmmakers, just showing how personally people felt connected to him. His auction belongings sold for staggering sums. They were almost treated as relics. And this revealed how profoundly his films, his art, had shaped people's lives. But why? This was a man who had an adjective, Lynchian, named after him. But what do we mean by that, by Lynchian? My guest today, the writer and cultural historian John Higg, returns to the Bureau. He's written a new book, Lynchian, The Spell of David Lynch, that tries to answer those questions while taking a deep dive into the hidden depths of Lynch's films, where beauty and horror, dream and reality, suburban innocence and lurking evil coexist, where simple pleasures, coffee, pie, music, take on a holy resonance in contrast to violence and decay, where we can take a journey into darkness and out again. Changed. Let's do it. Well, I'm very glad to welcome him back to the Bureau of Lost Culture. Can't quite remember when it was he was here last time, but John Higgs, welcome back, John.
Thank you very much. It's lovely being back.
In the meantime, you've been pumping out books. I mean, sorry, pumping, that's a bit derogatory because I'm sure they're very carefully considered and they're squeezed out sort of gently. But
I think they are very carefully considered, and also I'm pumping them out. I don't see a contradiction there.
Well, for listeners, I'm just going to give you a little list of some of John's books. There's not even all of them. I've got America Surrounded, The Life of Timothy Leary, The KLF, Chaos, Magic and the Band They Burned, £1 Million. The Future Starts Here, Adventures in the 21st Century, William Blake vs. the World, Love and Let Die, Bond, The Beatles and the British Psyche. That covers a lot of ground, doesn't it, that one?
Yeah.
Stranger Than We Can Imagine, Making Sense of the 20th Century. That's the one that we talked about last time in terms of like the birth of the teenage, the emergence of youth culture.
Absolutely, sort of impact on culture.
That's it. And then very recently, Exterminate, Regenerate, the Story of Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, your new book, Lynchian, and we're going to talk about Lynchian and David Lynch, right? That's quite a lot, isn't it?
If you are foolish enough to decide that you're going to try and earn a living writing books, and just earn a living writing books, you do have to put the hours in. You do have to put the effort in. Well,
I'm glad you mentioned that because, I mean, you've also done quite a lot of other stuff, haven't you? Directing children's television animation.
Oh, back in the day, yeah, absolutely.
Producing video games for Xbox, PlayStation 2.
I have done those things, yeah.
Right.
But when I turned 40,
right,
that was the point where I sort of made the decision that, no, I'm going to
abandon those lucrative, well-paid jobs.
Yeah, I know it's insane, but I just had to.
Right.
I knew it was very much a leap of faith. I had to do it, and amazingly, all these years later, I'm still just earning a living.
Well, bravo you! So, I mean, that was a signpost in the road, was it? When you got I'm going to go this way, or I can peel off to the left, as it were.
It's like when you have a need, a desire to really, I really want to be X. It doesn't go away.
Had you always had that?
I had, but it sort of grew as time went on. I think in my early 20s, the thought of writing books appealed to me, but I didn't need to. I was easily distracted by other things. I worked a lot in TV in those years. It was that sort of 90s boom of independent TV companies, and interesting, exciting stuff was happening. The internet was appearing. There was a lot sort of happening. I just have the sort of brain that just sits there sort of going, oh, if that was a book, then you could do that and you could structure it that way. And if you added all that sort of stuff, not writing books. It's not a healthy way, not a healthy thing to do when you've got that sort of brain.
If the muse is calling you, as it were, it's a very dangerous thing to refuse the call, isn't it?
I think it is.
I mean, obviously one's always beset by insecurities and worries about money and family and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, if you don't kind of obey the muse to an extent at least, you're asking for trouble, aren't you?
All those things are very, very real. And it's a sad thing. I mean, if I go to a literary festival, sometimes they get all the authors together for a meal. You're just waiting for them to start talking about how their Airbnb is doing, right? Because They're all landlords.
Really?
Like all the authors
Really?
have another source of
They've
income.
got a side hustle.
They've all got a side hustle. They've got family money. They've got,
Okay.
a very well-paid spouse, or some have got jobs in academia, or they're comedians, which are great, or journalists, which really help with their work. But the idea of just earning a living writing books is not how the industry is set up, or not how it works.
So whereas there was a sort of golden age where you could make a reasonable living as a novelist, say, for instance,
I mean, there's talk of such a thing happening,
right.
but it's so far removed from my experience.
My oldest, closest friend, Glenn Duncan, who's a novelist, like you, but the muse came for him very early. He wrote his first novel at the age of 15, 16.
Lovely.
Unpublished, it's still
Sure.
written in pencil.
Lovely.
Yeah, somewhere.
It's probably still his favourite as well, is it?
I did read it. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. I don't think he'd be prepared to publish it, probably because it might be a little bit, teenage. But he went on and became a successful novelist. He's written many novels. But even as a successful novelist, it's very precarious, up and down. But it's all he's ever done. I mean, he committed, like the answer the muse committed to it. What's slightly worrying about that, it's a bit like with art school now, isn't it? I went to art school. Would you go to art school now unless you've got money behind you?
Oh, it is. I mean, as I say, writers are landlords, artists are landlords, and musicians and filmmakers coming up are the children of landlords. That seems to be I'm not wishing to slag off an entire demographic of people, but they are quite comfortable with how the world is when they have that money behind them.
That buffer.
They don't desperately want to change the world. They're not seeking something different. If you listen to, The Clash or something like that,
right.
There's a need there. There's a fury. There's a desire for something better, which is lacking in a lot of the more comfortable sort of storytellers and creators.
Particularly with the arts, then it almost sounds like we're kind of reversing back to the kind of Victorian age where only posh people can do it.
It feels that way.
Or in this case, well off.
There are little hopeful windows. I mean, I probably know more musicians and writers who are just about eking out a living thanks to Bandcamp, thanks to Substack, YouTube for a lot of people. It's obviously tough and it's hard, but with the sort of collapse of the gatekeepers, it can be possible if you can do something that connects with people, that people value and matters to them.
And if you've got, I suppose, the kind of personality that connects with people as well, because a lot of artists and writers used to be quite introverts, didn't they?
Yeah.
But now you can't really afford to be an introvert, can you?
No, I mean, what is it? When I was working in TV, I remember someone said that in the arts, you need to be two of three things. You need to be either like brilliant, easy to get on with, or quick, right? And if you're two of those, you can probably get a career. But now it's almost like there's an extra one, which is a position of connections and financial security or something like that. And if you have three of those four, you're probably going to be okay. Whenever I think, should I be doing something else? I go, no, I must continue doing this.
You've produced a lot of books, I think probably at least 3 since we last spoke. You're just about to publish Lynchian, the spell of David Lynch. And we haven't talked about Lynch directly on this show, although he's come up a few times. So when he died earlier this year, I don't really have heroes so much, but actually when David Lynch died, I thought, one of my heroes has died. It did feel like it. And I think a lot of people felt like that. You start off, don't you, in a way, talking about the fact that there was this outpouring of grief when he died earlier this year. And that's unusual, isn't it? For a filmmaker, I think that's unusual. Almost like you might get it for a musician.
Yeah. I mean, if you think of the great filmmakers at the moment, Christopher Nolan or Denis Villeneuve or Sam Mendes or whoever you might choose, as great as they are, there isn't going to be a spontaneous sort of public shrine appearing in the streets when they die.
No.
People don't do that for filmmakers. They do it for David Bowie, do it for Princess Diana.
Charlie Kirk. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, that aside, they do it for people who they feel close to, really. They feel who was an important part of their lives, who sort of spoke to them on a level that maybe other people didn't. I think it just brought it home to a lot of people how David Lynch, who couldn't get a film greenlit for the last 19 years of his life, his position was sort of strange in that If you look at what he's achieved, with he had an honorary Oscar. He directed these 10 wonderful films, as successful as a film director could be. But at the same time, the industry had no way prepared to fund all the films that he wanted to make. Maybe European companies that would give him a bit of money, Studio Canal, people like that.
That's a sort of symptom or a signifier of it, but fans creating shrines filled with donuts and coffee and cigarettes and blue roses, and his auction belongings, the scripts, the furniture, his coffee machine, his espresso machine, selling for staggering sums. Treated as relics.
Everything that was listed in the auction of his things went for, countless times more than was predicted. If he could have realised those prices for all the stuff he had lying around his house, he could have funded one of his unmade scripts.
Was that something behind why you decided to write this book, Lynchian?
Very much so.
Right.
I run a film club in Lewes, in East Sussex, called the East Sussex Psychedelic Film Club, which I do with Richard Norris from The Grid and Andy Stark, who is a film producer, did a lot of Ben Wheatley stuff. And we showed Eraserhead like 10 days before he died. I have this vivid memory of watching people come out of our screening of Eraserhead in this chapel in Lewes. Normally when people come out of the things we show, they're sort of slightly stunned and there's a step that they all fall down. That's what we go for. That's our normal thing. People were coming out of Eraserhead just looking elated. There was a beatific look on their faces. But if you think about the story about the man struggling with the responsibility of this deformed baby, how has it had that effect on people?
Yeah. It didn't have that effect on me. Did it have that effect on you?
It did. Not on the first time I saw it. I think it does now. And the impact David Lynch's films have on people is just unlike any other filmmaker. And even, when people copy David Lynch and try and do David Lynch type things, it never works. It's only David Lynch can do that. Yeah. Every time you rewatch one of his films, it just goes up in your estimation. It's such a unique thing. He puts you in a sort of state of consciousness, really, that you don't normally get from film.
So you use the word Lynchian, and that's quite rare, isn't it, to actually have an adjective called after you. You get Orwellian, haven't you? You got Kafkaesque. Go anybody else? Like Bowie-esque or something?
Yeah, McCartney-esque or something like that. But it's not one that's commonly sort of used. It's not one that's...
so that in itself as an approbation is pretty amazing.
It's in the OED.
Right. It's in the OED.
Oxford English Dictionary.
Right. So tell us about what Lynchian means then to you. Because you say it's not just a case of copying his visual style and the flickering lights and the strange sounds. And what is it?
For me, it's the seductive appeal of mystery is a large part of it. Lynch is not something that you should try and solve. There's tons of, 4-hour-long videos on YouTube that will go, I'll explain to you everything that happens in Twin Peaks and it'll all make sense. And it is fascinating and it is interesting and it is convincing. But then you watch another one that makes completely different explanations for the same sort of things. And that's all equally convincing. It's such a multi-faceted piece of art that you're always going to get different things.
And he resisted...
Yeah, absolutely.
The idea of it as a puzzle which could be solved, didn't it? It was not going to be drawn on what it meant, if it ever even had a meaning to him. Yeah.
For him, it was the experience. It was, you just sit in the darkened room and you watch it, and the experience that you have, that's what the film is. You can't do it wrong. And it was like music, he thought, in that people can't rationally get their left brain to explain why this had the impact on him that it did. But they know it had the impact on him that it did.
Right, so it's more about how it made you feel rather than feast for the eyes or a kind of, the narrative being a thing in itself.
Yeah, and it's kind of a reminder of just kind of how small and limited the sort of rational world is. There's a lot more outside that.
It's about dream consciousness. Obviously Mulholland Drive, and we'll definitely come back to talk more about Mulholland Drive, but I don't think anybody else has quite caught what it's like to be dreaming on film. The way that narratives in your dreams shift, inexplicably. And yet somehow meaningfully.
The way one person will just suddenly become someone else, which, will happen in a dream and you'll just accept it. But if it happened in, a James Bond film or something like that, you'd be up in arms. This isn't how the world works. I mean, there's a lot of strange films out there. There's a lot of very psychedelic, weird things. So it's not just that. You watch things by, say, Peter Strickland or Bertrand Mandico or Leos Carax or something like that. Wonderful, amazing, strange, psychedelic things you've never seen before, taking you into totally different worlds and subjecting you to totally different sort of experience. That can be done. But they're not quite like what Lynch is doing. They're not. He is doing something kind of precious, really. Now we don't have him. Where are we going to get it from?
That's a question, isn't it? Well, look, why don't we try and work out how he got there? You talk about his childhood in Idaho, and what was it that went on there in the 50s, that maybe sort of led to that kind of particular aesthetic consciousness that he had?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very, very pivotal, his childhood, as he would have, thought of it, was just paradise. That post-war boom, between the Korean War and the Vietnam War, that Eisenhower years of growing prosperity, of safety, of Cadillacs and Elvis and TV and marketing and all that exciting 1950s. Optimistic. It was bright. For a small child growing up in that, only seeing that sort of side of it. It's almost like a Charlie Brown-like sort of background. His father worked for the Department of Agriculture, and he was kind of responsible for experimenting on the great forests that surrounded this Boise, where he grew up in Idaho, which he recalls as being like a small town at the time, even though it's a capital city now. And they were studying disease and insects and the decay of the natural world. So from a very early on, he sort of knew that there was surface level of the world with all its beauty and wonder and something like that. But behind it, going on, there was a
death and decay.
There was a darkness. There was a decay. One story he told quite often, but almost to me seems to be the thing that powers all his films, it was late at night. He was out playing with his brother, and he talks about how the street lights were a much thinner light then. They weren't the ones we have now. It's very so thick darkness and silence, and from out the darkness, just across the street, just this is his area that he knows, the few blocks where he lives. This naked woman just appeared out of the darkness with a bloodied face and walking strangely. And she was sort of walking towards them, but she didn't really see them. And he was just struck that her skin was basically the colour of milk. And his brother started crying because they didn't know what this was, but they just knew that something was just bad. There's something bad about this. To an adult, you can imagine what's the backstory of that is. To a child, from out of the darkness that surrounds that light of the town, that light of civilization, there were things that went on that you couldn't understand, but you could only really look at with the innocence of a child. And this image of this beaten woman appearing and entering the light, the things that are out in the darkness, they don't stay there. They can come in. They can come to you. That's.
And how old was he?
I believe he was just turning into a teenager. So I think he may have been about 12 at that time. When
so also the sight of just a naked woman as well, right?
Yeah.
And you've got a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah, I mean, he said she was beautiful. He was old enough to sort of recognise that. So when you see, in the first episode of Twin Peaks, you see the woman walking across the bridge all beaten and shaken. When you look at Blue Velvet and the Dorothy Valens character just appearing naked on a suburban street, it's that moment. He keeps going back to that. It's how it made him feel,
right?
Because there's real evil in Lynch's universe. It's not just some people make bad decisions, and it's not something a human can possibly comprehend. It's not like a Agatha Christie mystery where, there's something we don't know, but once we find out, the world clicks back into place and everything is ordered and things like that. It's the sort of mystery that the world will never be the same again if you understand it. It's like when Einstein, discovered the theory of relativity. The old world vanished and a new world came with atomic power and all that sort of stuff. It was a more confusing, a more strange, a more terrible sort of world appeared from solving that mystery.
Yeah, and also the kind of sinister horror of that image, the beaten woman bleeding. It's not the kind of splatter type horror which we have got more accustomed to with horror films. There's something deeply disturbing about it, isn't there? But you're not quite sure what it is.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's coming through suburban, perfect American dream vision. Right?
It's about your world, the world small logging towns, Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, those sort of places, with the discovery of unfathomable evil in these beautiful sort of places. And then he made a lot of films in Los Angeles when he was living in Los Angeles, and again that sort of undercurrent that he's always drawn to. So
just that image alone was like had a huge impact on him and then the work that he made. And then he made 10 films.
He was always working, he was always painting, or he was making furniture or whatever he was doing. He was not a person who suffered from writer's block or the equivalent in other artistic pursuits. The most important thing in his life was art, to the extent that, his family was secondary.
You can catch ideas from daydreaming, or you can catch ideas from places. If you think that maybe a place could conjure ideas, then you have to go out of the house and go traveling. You could be going down the street, see a reflection on a little pool in the gutter, and bang, an idea will come. Who knows how it happens? I always say it's like there's a man in another room with the whole film together, but they're in puzzle parts, and he's flipping one piece at a time into me. And at first, it's very abstract. I don't know, I have a clue. More pieces come, more ideas are caught. It starts forming a thing. And then one day, there it is. So there is, in a way, there's no original ideas. It's just the ideas that you caught. That the thing is to be true to the idea. Trillions and zillions of ideas. And they're all there bubbling and ready to be caught.
So it's not that he was too lazy or comfortable to work and keep making films. It was just that, especially in America, the idea that you don't go to the cinema to be confused or upset or things like that. But all those films are still being shown. They've always just been selling and selling and selling and selling out. And next year there's more, David Lynch seasons being planned because it's one of the few things that's getting people out of the house to the cinema is his work. So they're sort of like slow motion hits.
Right, yeah. And they're going to be around, aren't they? Yeah. You can sort of fairly confidently say that like in 30 years' time, people are probably going to be watching most of David Lynch's films, right?
Absolutely believe it. And they don't really date because they're sort of not really in any real time. A lot of his stuff is sort of in the time it was made, but also in the 1950s in a strange sort of way, in the clothes and the hairstyles and the music that young people are listening to. It's not quite a real time, so it's timeless. So it's out of time.
So Eraserhead was his debut. That is quite some debut, isn't it? That was straight in, no foreplay, wasn't it? Really,
it's probably important to say that unlike the rest of his generation of filmmakers, he did not grow up longing to be a filmmaker. He did not grow up in love with cinema, in the way that, Scorsese or Spielberg or Coppola or all those guys were. It wasn't until he was in his 20s that he even really thought of cinema. He wanted to be an artist.
Right.
Even when he was at high school, he got a studio. He'd read this book, The Art Spirit, which convinced him that the art life, where you give everything to art, is the life for him. He was, painting away and getting into art school in Philadelphia and just wanted to be a painter, just wanted to be an artist. And it's probably fair to say that people didn't love his work as much as he did. It was dark and it was unsettling and it was not the sort of thing you'd really go, I must put that on my wall. That'll be great above the fire. He talks a lot about this moment when he was in art school and he was painting. It was like a garden at night where there's a figure underneath all this sort of green foliage. And he just heard what he called a little wind. He heard this noise, and then the painting started to move, and the foliage started to rustle. And he was just looking at it, and he was just thinking, this is wonderful, you know. It's like the world he was creating wanted to live. Once that happened, the realization that, well, I could make it move on film. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should do film. Film was secondary then. It wasn't the impulse. It was the artistic impulse.
Started with the image, and the image becomes animated in some way.
Yeah. And film was the medium which allowed him to do that. Film was also the way that he could sort of get people to see the world how he saw it. It's easy to just, you look at a painting and you can glance at it and sort of walk off. But when time's passing and when the music and the sound and he's guiding your attention and your focus, you're sort of in his dream. So something like the Eraserhead Baby, if you just do a painting of it, you'd look at it and go, that's quite weird, and walk off. But when you're watching that film, you start to empathise with it because you see it over time. You know, film was powerful enough medium to make his dreams really transferable. It was the one way he had to make you see what the world as he saw it.
For somebody who's never seen this film and, you know, might think about it, how would you describe it? Because it's very difficult.
It's a black and white experimental student film from the late 70s that we're still talking about now, which narrows it down. I'm pretty sure everyone will have seen that picture of Jack Nance with his head,
big
with
hair,
his hair putting up and that sort of bemused look on his face. There is something about that image that gets to people.
It's a film that doesn't make sense in the conventional sense of this. It's got a kind of story, isn't it?
Story about a man who becomes a father of a sort of sick child and the responsibility. He struggles with the responsibility of this. You know, doesn't do it in any way justice. You know, I think
it's not about that, is it? In a strange way.
I think if anybody is listening to this and doesn't know Eraserhead, then it's the only way they'll know Eraserhead is by watching Eraserhead.
There's nothing like it still.
No, there's nothing like it still.
Right. That's quite an achievement, isn't it? You know, I mean, maybe a lot more art films were getting made and shown in the 70s because of the countercultural years. But even then, you know, to pull off as a newbie feature film with actors and sets and also a film that looks like that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, he was still a student. He was at the American Film Institute. They had some stables at the back of their complex in Los Angeles. And he basically just moved into these stables and stayed there for 4 years and slept in the sets and slept in that world and made the film whenever he had enough money for some, you know, more footage, for more film. He had a tiny, small crew around him who were devoted to him.
Right.
And, you know, would keep coming back for, you know, no or virtually no money, year in, year out, to help him sort of realise this vision. The impact he personally has on the actors and crew around him is a massive part of the David Lynch stick.
This kind of respect and trust that he seemed to engender in people. That's interesting that was already there with like the crew of Eraserhead. But later on, with actors, they saw him. It wasn't a mentor. It wasn't a father figure. It was this sort of pole star or something, wasn't it?
He's very much an icon of pure creative spirits unvarnished by the realities of the industry. Or his art for art's sake, the vision, the idea, the state of consciousness, the feeling, the atmosphere, that in a way that many people are much more career driven or sensible.
But also quite challenging. I mean, like, you know, so he gave cryptic directions, you know, move like a deer in the snow.
Yeah.
You can imagine for some actors that would be, you know, just give me a script, I'm going to do my lines.
Yeah.
But for other actors, it would probably be a huge sense of relief, wouldn't it? That actually you've got somebody who's clearly giving you an intuitive direction.
It's absolutely intuitive. I think my favourite was Russ Tamblyn, who played Dr. Jacoby in Twin Peaks. And they were trying to do a scene and Lynch came up to him and said, we'll do it again, but this time don't think about what the words you're saying or what they mean. Like, just think about ghosts. And then they got exactly what he wanted. Someone else was told, you know, imagine you're speaking to your father, but there's a hummingbird flapping around his head or something like that.
Which would kind of discombobulate people, but then maybe they would respond in some way or act in some way, which was out of their pattern.
Yeah, that sense of discovery, I think, is what actors love so much. They don't know what's going to happen. They often don't have the script or the full story. They just have their scenes, and they just do what David tells them. You know?
Right.
And in that way, they discover things and portray things that no other director's ever going to get out of them.
Interestingly, just to contrast that a little bit, because I did an interview with Barry Adamson.
Oh, yes.
And, Barry obviously scored
Lost Highway.
Yeah. Because he said that David sent him an edit, and discussed it with him, and they worked to it, and Barry did the sound and the music, and Lynch was happy with it. And then Barry thought, actually, I could improve that bit, actually. And he sort of redid a bit and sort of sent it back, and Lynch was like, no, I wanted it this way.
Yeah.
And Barry was like, well, yeah, but this is better. And it's like, no, I want it this way. He could be obviously quite directorial and dictatorial at times, right?
Oh, absolutely. He has a sense of what he wants that's unshakable. That thing he has in his head.
Maybe instead of actually wondering why or bemoaning the fact that Hollywood wouldn't let him make more films, maybe we should wonder the fact that he managed to get 10 done.
Yeah.
It's actually that he did manage to do these 10 movies, right?
I mean a lot is down to the French and the Polish and Europe in general, just really getting him and loving what he did and valuing his work on that sort of level. Eraserhead was his student film, so totally independent sort of thing. Then he had this film, Ronnie Rocket, that he was desperate to make, and still to this day it's never been made, about this small guy at the birth of rock and roll, and there was a villain who would reverse electricity so that it gave darkness instead of light. And after failing to get this off the ground for so long, he started to take on other people's stories, which worked amazingly for The Elephant Man, because he was absolutely the right person for that.
Let's talk about The Elephant Man.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about it.
It is incredible, isn't it? So maybe people know it, but the story of Joseph Merrick, who had this genetic condition which was hideous, actually. People just said that his mother had been chased down by an elephant or something when she was pregnant. It wasn't anything to do with that, but then he became a kind of circus freak performer, didn't he?
In the Victorian era,
yeah.
where freak shows were a sort of common thing.
Sort of skipped across between London and the continent, didn't he? And was kind of taken advantage of by various people, and ended up in Whitechapel in the hospital. And a brilliant performance
by John Hurt. Almost unrecognisable under all these prosthetics. The Elephant Man is a figure who, for most people, is monstrous. And you recoil at the sight of this figure. But not Lynch. Lynch loves texture. He loves organic decay as much as industrial decay. When he sees something like The Elephant Man, he just sees it as a wondrous, sort of beautiful thing. So no other film director would be able to get you to see Joseph Merrick in the deeply humane ways that film gets you to see him. It's a wonderful
It's a fantastic film.
It really holds up.
Yeah.
It's not strange in the way that most of David Lynch's stuff is. It's not, characters don't, turn into other people, or there's no doppelgangers, or a lot of his other sort of tropes. It's a straightforward, emotional story, powerfully told, was, nominated for many Oscars.
But it's almost as though Merrick, as the Elephant Man himself, is so strange that there's not really any need to make the film strange.
I think that's exactly it, yeah. And it's almost about making that strangeness normal, so you see him as a human being in a way that a lot of people really didn't at the time.
It's almost like the kind of slightly beautiful horror of fungus.
Yes.
You can see a fungus in the woods, and it's kind of weird and alien.
Yeah, and you can be slightly repulsed, but you're drawn to it at the same time. That means a lot to David Lynch. And also because, he was a young, inexperienced American director, suddenly in London, directing Anthony Hopkins and these wonderful, classic sort of British actors. And I think he had suicidal thoughts at the time of The Elephant Man. It was certainly around then that he was out of his depth, that he couldn't sort of do it. And he described being in an old Victorian hospital, which they would eventually film in. this little wind, he said, just sort of, it just came and it entered him. And at that moment, he knew what the Victorian world was. And he had this, it was like gnosis. It was certainty came. And his description of this like little entity that came and gave it to him. It's not like a devil or an angel or anything like that. It's something a little bit different. And then you see in his films, particularly from that point on, these supernatural things that aren't from the book, as it were, that aren't normal. You know, things like Bob in Twin Peaks, or the mystery man in Lost Highway, or the man from the other place, and they're not just a straight demon or anything like that. They're supernatural entities from beyond who sort of enter our world and work in our world. And the reason they're in his films is because they're in his life, in his world. That was the world he lived in, where these little supernatural moments. Obviously, transcendental meditation was a massive thing for him.
Let's talk about the transcendental meditation, because that was another thing which he became famous for, and on the surface of it seems quite contradictory somehow to the movies. Something about meditation, which is the wellness industry and balance, but it was so important to him, wasn't it? And he was very public about it as well, which had been quite rare, I suppose. So when did that come in terms of the chronology of the films, and how did it impact him?
That was midway through Eraserhead. And you can sort of see the changes that happen while he's making Eraserhead from the original script, which just has quite a bleak ending where Henry is just devoured by this baby, and that's it. The film follows the beginnings of the script. Then he learned transcendental meditation. And then all these new ideas started to come to him. Most specifically, the lady in the radiator. And the lady in the radiator is this sort of, again, one of those hard to pigeonhole spiritual entities who appears when he sort of contemplates the warmth and the comfort of his radiator in his room. She sings this little song that could be sentimental. In heaven, everything is fine, but it's genuine. And the film ends when, she embraces Henry. It's a moment of grace that's so unexpected because of the world that it's come from. So different. And
maybe that's why people leave feeling enlivened in some way, right?
I think so. And this sense of ending his work with an encounter with the numinous, very much a reoccurring sort of thing. You've got the Good Witch in Wild at Heart. You've got the Robins in Blue Velvet. You've got the angel in Fire Walk with Me, which is sort of these spiritual things appear at the end. And I do think this is a large part of the power that Lynch has on us, because film directors, they do reveal their worldview through their work. Most are nihilists and don't believe in anything, and they can do amazing spectacles to distract you from that, or some believe that we're all like victims and there's no hope and things like that. For Lynch, there was a layer of pure mind under everything, a layer of just consciousness. I'm thinking of in Twin Peaks, The Return, where the Red Room breaks up and Kyle MacLachlan falls into nothingness, but he's kind of rescued just before he enters this purple sort of expanse of ocean, which is an extremely beautiful shot. In Lynch's work, there can be extraordinary levels of cruelty and horror and abuse and the darker side of humanity. But ultimately, underneath it all, there is this layer of bliss, this sheer sort of awareness of existence that ultimately makes it all bearable.
And that came from the transcendental meditation.
I think so. I think he was an angry man. He was going to go to therapy, but he was worried that it would sort of blunt his edge. And it's only when his sister talked to him about meditation and he decided to sort of give it a go, then he realized that, oh my God, that does not blunt your edge at all, as the body of work that came after shows very, very clearly. Anger was a thing that stopped him creating, stopped him working. It was a poison, it was a sickness. Once you can deal with this with the meditation, I think his creativity after that point speaks wonders.
When I started meditating, I was filled with anxieties, filled with fears, kind of a depression and anger. And I took this anger out on my first wife. And after 2 weeks of meditation, she comes to me and she says, "What's going on?" And I was quiet for a moment because it could have been any number of things she might have been referring to. But I finally said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "This anger, where did it go?" And I didn't even realize it had lifted. Now, these negative things like anger and depression and sorrow, they're beautiful things in a story, but they're like a poison to the filmmaker. They're a poison to the painter. They're poison to creativity. They're like a vice grip. If you are super depressed, you can't hardly get out of bed, let alone think ideas, have that creativity flowing. So it's money in the bank to get that beautiful consciousness growing, which is flowing creativity, the ability to catch ideas at a deeper level. Intuition grows. This field is a field of pure knowingness. You dive in there, you sort of just know how to go. You know how to solve solutions. It's like an ocean of solutions. And you can just feel this thing growing. But the ultimate thing for me is the enjoyment of the doing, the enjoyment of life grows huge. I love making films now more than ever before. Ideas flow more. Everybody has more fun on the set. Creativity flows. People look like friends and not like enemies. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's us.
So let's talk a little bit about Twin Peaks. I mean, it's an incredible achievement as a TV series as well, a shift into TV, you know, and that long form thing.
Yeah.
But also, I think the collaboration with Mark Frost was very valuable, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Because it kind of reined him in a bit, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult to kind of imagine just a Lynchian TV series in some ways, isn't it? You know.
And yes, Mark Frost, you know, he'd done Hill Street Blues. He knew television in a way that Lynch didn't. They'd worked on some film scripts and together. At the time, the notion of a film director of Lynch's credibility, you know, this is after The Elephant Man and Blue Velvet, making television was like kind of shocking. You know, directors wouldn't do it for fear they would be perceived that their career was on the slide. And that, you know, there was status games, but would have prevented at those days film directors from, you know, making TV things. But Lynch never really was a film director first and foremost. He was an artist first and foremost. Film was just something that he could play with and experiment with and get these effects with. And so was TV. TV was something worth sort of playing with and experimenting with and seeing what he could do with it. So he didn't have that ego problem. And so he probably transformed drama for the 21st century by producing something that was so good.
You know, if you think about shows like Dark or, you know, which has been on Netflix, you know, and it's that probably wouldn't exist if Twin Peaks hadn't existed somehow, you know.
No, but also the ambition and also the making it okay for film people to make television, which is perfectly normal now.
No, it's completely, they probably want to do that, right? Yeah.
The freedom of long form storytelling that it sort of gives.
And the way that, you know, that it teases us out across the episodes. And
because TV had been so formulaic, you know, it was just a murder of the week sort of
episodic. I mean, maybe a cliffhanger at the end of each episode, and wasn't it? There was a formula, right?
Definitely. But I mean, Twin Peaks was an evening soap opera.
Do you think it was Mark Frost that brought that to it?
I mean, Mark Frost loved The Prisoner, the ITV 1960s, that sort of strange psychedelic sort of world. He loved Sherlock Holmes, so he loved mystery. He loved all these things. And, you know, he knew how to work a cast and recurring things over over time. In many ways, Twin Peaks is much more of a communal effort than anything else that Lynch did. It's just we think of it of David Lynch's because when he directed the pilot, he stamped his aesthetic, his personality, his mood on it so strongly that all the directors and writers who worked on it afterwards are all just trying to do that thing to David Lynch it up. Yeah. There was just that little window when the networks were like going, oh, we're just going to have to throw money at the problem of streamers, Netflix and things like that. And so he was just given a huge check to make his thing in a way that was so rare in his career. But just in that particular window of the entertainment ecosystem, someone was prepared to, fund him to complete his vision. And he was in his 70s, I think, when he was making it. And he was working long hours for months, an exhausting, thing. It was basically an 18-hour film with a cast of 200. Once you've seen it 2 or 3 times, then you really start to appreciate what's in there. I mean, it's a lot to start with when you first watch it.
But it's quite bamboozling at first, isn't it? And then when you somehow settle into the bamboozledness of it, then it becomes sort of very highly compulsive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, there was other films along the way, and we mentioned Blue Velvet, another kind of like epic moment. So he was on a very, very successful tip, wasn't he? He was doing what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And he was being commercially successful at this time. A rare thing, right, to have both of those things going on. I mean, maybe P.T. Anderson's done it as well.
There was still an underlying sort of level of he goes too far.
Right. Okay.
This is too disturbing. Something like Blue Velvet, sort of the voyeuristic way he filmed the rape of Isabella Rossellini's character. The way it was too much for most people. The abuse of women is such a recurring theme in Lynch's work. And yet when you look at the Lynch fandom, it does tend to skew pretty female.
Does it?
Even though things like Fire Walk with Me, which is a film he made as a prequel to Twin Peaks, that was not about all the things people loved about Twin Peaks Cherry Pie and small town goodness. It was about the fact that this is a story about a father raping their daughter, and killing their daughter. It was that sort of dark. Even though it was represented in this sort of abstract way of this spirit Bob possessing the father character. The amount of letters he started to get from women who had been abused from their fathers, who just couldn't sort of get across how accurate it felt. A lot of the dark places he goes to, when you just list them and just say them outright, it just sounds absolutely appalling. And you think, well, what a horror this man must be. But it's when you see them in the context of the film and the atmosphere and the way he's sort of dealing with them. He's not afraid to look at real darkness.
And do you think that he was able to do that because of his successes, which might have been surprising successes in some ways, and yet when the studios had given him the rope to make these films, they were slightly appalled by them, and probably even more surprised if they became successful or well loved. So there was always this tension, do you think? But it's like, he seems to be doing box office, but there's something we don't like going on here.
Yeah, his box office was never, let's forgive him everything. But there was a period after he'd done Elephant Man and Blue Velvet into the first series of Twin Peaks where he was just at the peak of his reputation, I guess. And, he was doing adverts for all the luxury brands of perfumes, and he was doing, Michael Jackson promos, and, he won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and, he was just on top of the world. But even then, there were people booing the fact that Wild at Heart won the Palme d'Or because it's, as they saw it, it was just sick, sick in some ways. It didn't last long, that period. Soon after that, it's like he just couldn't get arrested. He made this sitcom on the air about a 1950s TV station, and I think they showed the first couple of episodes and then just didn't bother showing the rest.
Right,
I think it was something like their lowest rating program that they'd ever seen. It was something ridiculous like that. And then he did the prequel to Twin Peaks, the movie Fire Walk with Me, which now is seen as a masterpiece. And Cheryl Lee's performance in particular, should have won every award going. It's phenomenal what she does in that film. But at the time, He was just out of sync with the culture.
Well, that experimental 70s, where there was a lot of auteur films getting made as well, Hollywood was changing a lot, wasn't it? It's like, yeah, we're done with that now. Let's move, let's move on to yeah. But I mean, we've got to talk about Mulholland Drive.
Still probably his best, isn't it?
I would say so for me, definitely. And particularly in terms of, I'm very interested in dreams. I write my dreams down in the morning. I don't analyse them. I just so the process of writing them down feels somehow enriching, right? The thing about dreams, consciousness, is that always surprising, mysterious, sometimes feel meaningful, sometimes it isn't meaningful, but you're walking down a street and the weirdest things are happening but in the dream they're not weird, right?
Yeah.
And he somehow, Mulholland Drive more than all the others for me, he caught that, the way you mentioned it earlier, where there's a story going on with characters and suddenly something shifts. They look the same, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
The story is moved in a way that you can't really explain. But in the dream, of course, you're accepting this as reality, right? I don't know anybody else has caught that as he did in Mulholland Drive.
No, it's fascinating. It's when the film came out, the general consensus was, well, it doesn't make any sense. Right? It was seen as incomprehensible. They put out like some clues to unravel the mystery, as if to make clear that no, there is a story here that you can work out and you can follow it. I saw some footage of a guy at the cinema in the 90s when it came out, and he was going, I've seen it 26 times and every time I understand it less. That was the general sort of consensus. Now when people watch it, they understand it. They sort of get it. It can often take a couple of watches till you go, oh, okay, so that was the dream, and then that's the reality. Got that.
And the same story seen from different perspectives.
Yes.
Reads completely differently at times, yeah. And you came away with a sense of meaning. No, sometimes we wake up from sleep, we've had a dream, which we might recall, and it felt meaningful. But if I had to tell you why it's meaningful, I couldn't. And maybe if I told it to you, maybe you'd reflect something back to me that you'd see a meaning in it that I didn't.
To be able to have a sort of a dreamlike experience that you can then put people in and they get as much out of it as you do takes, an extraordinary level of craft. Slowing down, forget the past, forget the future, just feel the atmosphere of the moment, feel the textures and the sounds and the sights, and just sink into that, of being absorbed in the now that he's so good at doing to people. And
that 1950s dream of Hollywood as well. I mean, it's not set in the 50s, but Hollywood as heaven, with the actors as these sort of demigods, and the kind of allure of that. But then underneath it, this terrible darkness.
Yes.
Of defeat and disappointed dreams.
He tells you the story of a wide-eyed, hopeful from a small town turning up in Los Angeles, and then what she's become by the end.
John, let's just talk, as we sort of get to the end, about his personal life. It doesn't matter in a sense that we know much more about David Lynch's private life, but whenever I saw anything with him outside the films, interviews with him when he's at home talking about coffee or cooking or something like that, he was very charming, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was utterly charming, and if he was with you, his attention would be focused on you completely, in a way that is very rare in Los Angeles, where people are looking over their shoulder for someone more interesting. Many people just fell in love with him. For him, art was first. So he often say he didn't ever want to get married or have children, but he got married 4 times and had 4 children with each wives, because he just loved the romance of falling into the moment. And it wasn't long-term relationships the way he worked. That was sort of his failure. The novelty of a new romance would be intoxicating to him, but then it would pass and he'd find other things to be fascinated with, and hence another divorce, and then another divorce, and then a relationship that ended like Isabella Rossellini, where he would just move on. It's easy to describe him in ways that make him sound like a womanizer or a user and discarder of women, but when you listen to their own words talking about him, that's not how they see him at all. He was always upfront about the fact that art came first, that his work came first. He never sort of hid that. That wasn't a horrible discovery. They all went into relationships with him, with that knowing that very clear. He was very much a product of that Eisenhower era republicanism, which doesn't look to society level problems. It just looks to individuals. And so it's very easy to criticize him for just recreating on film that early world that he grew up in. You know, there's over 200 speaking parts in Twin Peaks: The Return, and only 3 of those are black, and they're really pretty minor roles. And the most prominent is a naked prostitute, which doesn't help matters either. And it's been pointed out from very early on, you know, you don't find black people in David Lynch's films. You don't really find gay men. He was criticised for the abuse that Isabella Rossellini's character takes in Blue Velvet. His response was always, it's the character, it's just the character. She does not represent all women. You know, this is the truth of this sort of character. The larger issues, such as the portrayal of women in American film in the 1980s, just didn't enter his thinking at all, which leads him to doing things like signing the petition for the release of Polanski, you know, things like that. We look at and go, oof, I wish he hadn't done that. That's a bit sort of disappointing. But when he is looking at the world on that individual level, a good example of this is the transgender character in Twin Peaks. He just does it with compassion. So you get that line delivered by Lynch himself, so it seems to have great authorial sort of intent, when the David Duchovny character was first transitioned in the bureau, everyone sort of mocked him and stuff like that, and he told them to fix their hearts or die. You know, it's a beloved line in the trans community. You know, you see it on T-shirts and things like that. His thinking wasn't sophisticated on a society levels. He didn't see the world in those sort of terms, but on a human level, he was compassionate. Although you can easily, slag him off for lots and lots of reasons. People generally don't, because the general sense of him having a good heart sort of comes through.
How did he cope with the downward arc, when he couldn't get stuff made, he said, for 19 years or whatever?
He was always painting, he was always making music or art. He would never have changed to please people. That he's almost an icon for artistic integrity. He just wanted to do the work. And as long as, there's a roof above his head, he can keep doing it. He can sort of keep going.
There's a couple of other people like that, aren't there? Terry Gilliam in some ways, but just in terms of had some big successes and lots of flops.
Yeah, and really
can't get arrested.
Struggles to get a film funded. Proper visionaries like that are rare, and when they're gone, we just wish they'd done twice as many films.
No, he got to the end. He died this year. Sadly, he was a smoker, wasn't he? Heavy smoker.
Yeah, emphysema.
And actually, my friend Ever, who's in LA, said that it was the fires that finished him off.
Yes, I think so. I mean, people moved him. But the stress and the strain of being moved out of his home with the fires raging around, the nastiness of the quality of the air was just too much for him, and then he died. We knew his health had been failing. We knew he often struggled to get from one side of the room to the other without oxygen. We knew he was basically housebound, and he was always trying to still create work, and maybe he could direct over Zoom, and all this sort of, his spirit was still, very, very strong. But man, that guy smoked for many, many years, and loved it.
But it was quite touching, I thought, that he came out and said, don't do it, kids. I mean, maybe he didn't regret it for himself, but he regretted it for other people, as it were.
He still talked a lot about how much he loved smoking and the smell of it, and how it was for him, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes and painting was the art life, and that was so that was everything he wanted.
Yeah, it's like when you see Tom Waits and Iggy Pop in Coffee and Cigarettes, and it's like if you've ever drank coffee or smoked cigarettes, it's like, you get that, you can get that, But he disappeared, he's gone. But you've written this book, John, the subtitle, The Spell of David Lynch, and of course that seemed the most appropriate thing in a way, because he did weave a spell on us, didn't he? There was a sort of enchantment and entanglement, kind of bamboozled us meaningfully, I suppose. That's it.
I think so. And the book isn't intended as a biography or a critical analysis of his films. It's just intended to make you think about the extent to which you're affected by what he does. It's not trying to solve the mystery or anything like that, but it's trying to make you appreciate the mystery makes me appreciate exactly what he did. His films are unique, possibly with the exception of June, in that every time you go back to them, they go up in your estimation. We were very lucky to have him, Stephen.
John, thanks very much for coming back to the Bureau of Lost Culture. I hope that you will come back again.
Cheers. I would love to.
Thanks very much to John. I'll put a link to his wonderful book, Lynchian, The Spell of David Lynch, in the show notes. And thanks to you for listening. I will see you, hear you, meet you further down the road for more of these tales from the other side, from the underground and the counterculture. Let's finish with the voice of David Lynch.
If you have a golf ball-sized consciousness, when you read a book, you'll have a golf ball-sized understanding. When you look out, a golf ball-sized awareness. And when you wake up in the morning, a golf ball-sized wakefulness. But if you could expand that consciousness, then you read the book, more understanding. You look out, more awareness. And when you wake up, more wakefulness. It's consciousness. And there's an ocean of pure, vibrant consciousness inside each one of us.